Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Scott Malbaurn and I am the director of the Schneider Museum of Art, part of the Oregon Center for the Arts here at SOU. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our special guests, Alyse Emdur and Michael Parker, who are participating in our outdoor exhibition titled Art Beyond. The exhibition brings together more than 24 artists with site-specific art installations and programs ranging from plein air painting to augmented reality. Alyse Emdur is an interdisciplinary artist. Her drawings, paintings, videos, and photography-based projects use earnest humor to face loneliness, existential crisis, social struggle, and the desire to escape. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Artforum, Art in America, Modern Painters, Cabinet Magazine, Huffington Post, The Atlantic, BBC News, Wired Magazine, Vrij Nederland Magazine, Art Papers Magazine, and Foam Magazine. Emdur is a graduate of the Cooper Union and holds an MFA from the University of Southern California. Michael Parker's art practice shifts scales, material, and temporality while making things such as juicy ceramic installations, recumbent obelisks, steam eggs, artist-run spaces, and public sculptures. Parker started teaching sculpture at Southern Oregon University 3 months before the pandemic began. Previously, he lived, taught, and made art in Los Angeles. Parker has had solo and cooperative projects at Materials and Applications, Craft Contemporary Museum, LA County Arts Commission, Annex LA at M+B Gallery, Artist Loft Museum Los Angeles, Descanso Gardens, Palm Springs Art Museum, current LA Biennial, LA Department of Cultural Affairs, the Getty Museum, Southern Exposure, High Desert Test Sites, Human Resources, Pomona College Museum of Art, the Armory Center for the Arts, Machine Project, California State Parks at the Bowtie, Los Angeles Trade Technical College, Cold Storage. He holds a BA from Pomona College and an EMT1 from UCLA and an MFA from USC. Parker is a recipient of the California Community Foundation Emerging Artist Fellowship, Center for Cultural Innovation Artist Resources for completion grant, Public Art Residency at Heart of Los Angeles, and Printed Matter Award for Artists. More than a mouthful for you both. Please join me in welcoming Michael Parker and Alyse Emdur. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Hi, Alyse.
Hi, thank you everyone for making it here on this very hot summer afternoon. We appreciate you here.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. So I guess we should start.
Yes, you guys are co-hosts. You can share your screen and get started when you are ready.
Okay, so hopefully you see some, it's a small world on the bunny slope. So Scott, thanks for the big introduction. So we moved here just before the pandemic with a tiny child. And so we wanted to share a little bit about us kind of personally. For those of you who don't know me, I am the guy who is going to invite my mailman, Victor, from our mailman for 10 years in Los Angeles as my kind of final studio visit before I dismantled our studios and moved to Los Angeles.
Okay. So this is me in the warm mineral springs filming my film, The Fountain of Youth. And I'm using it to demonstrate the way that I work and also the way that Michael often works, is that we often, make socially engaged work very close with people. And so when we were thinking about, ideas for Art Beyond, and it was sort of in the beginning or the middle of the pandemic, there was still so much that was unknown. And so it was sort of like this conundrum for us, how do we make something that involves people that is socially distant at the same time? And so one of our first ideas that we were interested in was making playground equipment that was also sculptures. So there were sculptures that could be interactive for children to play on. on Mount Ashland. And Scott, this is still something that I'm interested in doing, which would be like curating an exhibition, you know, inviting sculptors to design sculptures that double as playground equipment. And so that is where, you know, we came up with this pedestal, which is this red seesaw, fulcrum seesaw. And, you know, at the time we were just like, the CDC was discouraging people from playing at playgrounds, you know, and of course now we go to playgrounds all the time with our daughter. But at the time it was discouraged. And so we were like, you know, let's not make playground equipment, but we still kept that part of the idea, and we made the seesaw the pedestal for the sculptures to sit on. And so as we went forward, it was really important to us to make a work that was really about human connection, and something that would connect us as new people, as new artists in town and new parents in town, with other artists and parents in town. And so that's where we came up with this idea to invite other parents to share some of the things that their toddlers were obsessed with and interested in. Yeah, so do you want to?
Okay, so this is what we sent out. Are you a parent of a toddler? For many children, the pandemic has made their world smaller. Very young children are coming into their own awareness during this most unusual time. Are they gravitating towards something that feels pandemic induced? Do you feel the social isolation of 2020, 2021 has drawn them towards an unusual obsession? Artists Michael Parker and Alyse Emdur are making a series of sculptures titled "It's a Small World on the Bunny Slope of These Things," which will be exhibited on the bunny slope of Mount Ashland. Okay, so we started getting submissions, and in some ways what we were kind of after was creating artifacts of this moment in world history for each of the toddlers. So how will their obsessions come to represent this moment for these newly conscious humans? And so part of it is that all the kids are getting the sculptures that we're about to then kind of go through and describe what they are and how we kind of came to it. But one thing I think kind of formally as an artist, it's really important, like as I think about like the bunny slope of Mount Ashland as like this site that Scott was like, here, make a sculpture for here. We kind of started thinking about like training and learning, and how do we kind of understand and take on new information. I think that's why this idea kind of became, but we were interested in like how when you walked up, it's like maybe discarded ski equipment and maybe a little bit ominous, which is kind of that feeling of like children and toddlers, they're so joyful, but yet all of us as these new toddler parents and baby parents, we're also have been so afraid through this time. So our child's obsession is the US Postal Service truck. We did not go out very much. We did not have any people over. Our family and friends all live super far away. So it was really only the male persons that came to our door. And then on walks, which we took a lot of walks, the mail truck is everywhere in town. And so the mailman became also one of our daughter's very first words. So I'm gonna now read you some of the submissions that we got. As we kind of go with the images. So this is installed right next to the mail truck. My son is 3. His obsession is taking nature walks and collecting medicine, our Apache tribal culture practice. Cedar is a medicinal, and when we go on walks, he collects it for us. And so for this, what I did was we just imprinted cedar into thin slabs of clay.
And this one I find particularly special because the child's name is Cedar. And he's obsessed with cedar. And I also just want to point out that, like, you know, we're really in this project, the subject is children and children's interests. And there's something about the subject of children that could easily be dismissed as cutesy, but we're really interested in elevating the interests of children and taking children seriously and thinking about how their interests and the objects that they gravitate to speak to the you know, their culture. And like, for instance, with Cedar's, you know, interest, it speaks to the importance of medicinals and connecting with nature.
So this is kind of pandemic adjacent, but most of our neighborhood burnt down in the Alameda fire. We were one of the lucky ones whose home survived. And due to the pandemic, we've been going on lots of walks. The reconstruction has been happening since November, and there have been a lot of diggers, or snorts, as we call them, in reference to the book, Are You My Mother?, in our neighborhood, making our walks super exciting. She loves the snorts. And so it's really fun to make that digger, I'll be honest.
And this is an example of an object that really reflects the time, you know, like this specific region and moment of living through a fire.
So this is described. So this was a hard one to figure out what it was going to look like. His car cabinet is built in with a tall, narrow door that conveniently looks just like this. And then the parent sent us an emoji of a door. Inside are 3 shelves, and he climbs into the second shelf while using the lowest shelf to stow everything he wants to take in his car, his trunk perhaps. So he turns everything into a car. Okay, and so then this was a very long submission, and so this is just an excerpt from it. We stumbled upon a parked car that was blue and had a rather large hole in the back bumper. My son stopped and stared at it and said, "It's blue car hole." And at the time, he was just starting to string a few words together. So he repeats it, blue car hole. And so we thought of this as like this vortex of time. And so we had to do a lot of interpreting ideas of what things could be. So back to the writing. We stopped for a moment and then we walked home. The next day, I asked him if he would like to go for a walk and where should we go? And he says, blue car hole. And that began their monthly, and that was a months-long routine of them going out and searching for blue car hole. And the story continued. My 19-month-old, bound by our front yard, is obsessed with the daffodils and dandelions growing in the grass. Every morning she has to be out there, like before breakfast, and she won't come in until she's ripped out as many as she can, placing them on large rocks. So this is these stars. This is a really complex one to figure out. But these stars represent the night sky. This is a kind of a 2-in-1 image. So our son is almost 19 months old. I'd say the obsession around here is the train, specifically the Central Oregon Pacific. He follows his older brother's lead, and so they both get really excited when the train passes by. We can see it from our house in Talent. He will push a chair up to the window so he can watch it. He is often the first one to hear it coming, and so we know it's about to go by because he's pushing a chair to the window. Okay, so that's the train going underneath. And then, okay, so the Bimpy Bumps have stayed consistent throughout the pandemic.
Can you point to that?
So
it's like the duck.
Yeah.
It looks like a duck in an airplane.
Yeah. So Bimpy Bumps are half duck, half fish, half bat, and half tadpole. Bimpy Bumps can fly, but their wings also help them swim. They especially like to swim in puddles. They look very cute. They live in families of about 30. They have gooey stuff on their body like a snail's foot. They are green in color. They have 2 eyes that glow red. They have long external gills that can stick out to poke predators. They are microscopic in size. They have wings and can fly. The wings have lines like bats and feathers like ducks. They have a tail like a tadpole's. They have hands on the ends of their wings to pick up their food. Their mouths are on the bottom of their feet. They stand on their food bowls and they eat like trees. Their noses are near their bums. It's where they go potty to. They go potty in the sky or on the land or in the water. We can eat their poop. It is edible. It's this type of squash. They can jump very high and then they can fly. That's how they fly. Okay, so I love that one. And I think maybe that's where the red color came from is reading they have 2 eyes that glow red. It was really a painful decision not to glaze these or to paint these, but it was a decision that we kind of once we happened upon it, we had to kind of we couldn't go back once we had kind of figured it out. So one thing to note is that on the final day of the exhibit of Art Beyond on July 18th at 3:30, we are having a toddler play date. So and then at 4 p.m., we're going to dismantle the installation and distribute the sculptures to each of the toddlers. And so for all of you who are not a toddler parent, you are welcome to join us on this play date. And a few of the toddler parents can't be there thus far. So we are organizing soon after a pickup for them. But one thing that I think is kind of important and weird is that up until this point, we still have not met any of the parents of the toddlers. We have some toddler friends, parents, but their kids didn't really have identifiable obsessions by the time we kind of needed to have these things made. So it's pretty interesting that we haven't met any of these toddlers.
We have dates to meet people.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to hand the reins over to Alyse to talk about her work and where it's kind of been.
So for Art Beyond, we chose to do something collaborative because it's a really big challenge for us. I think there's something about collaboration that seems really like light and airy and optimistic and fun. But for us, it's always been incredibly difficult. And we have collaborated a few times, but we mostly act as like supports for one another. We've shared a studio for over 10 years. And so we help each other make work, but it's often our own unique visions. But we wanted to share our individual practices with you, just like a little excerpts, little snippets of it, so that you can see how we got where we are. And so I think no talk on my work would be complete without mentioning prison landscapes, because it's a project that I worked on for 8 years, and that has culminated in this book here. So the photo that you see is a Polaroid image that I found in 2005. I'm posed with my older brother and sister in the visiting room at Bayside State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey. At the time, I was accustomed to posing in front of backdrops, like for school pictures or at amusement parks, but this backdrop in prison felt very different. It represented freedom, which was the exact opposite of the prison's mission and the reality that my brother was living. And so the backdrop in prison really sort of like amplified the sadness of visiting him. My sister and I, we could go to the beach, but our brother, he couldn't go with us for those 10 years that he was incarcerated. And so we could show, our friends this picture of us, and nobody would know that he was incarcerated. And so finding this photograph a very long time ago, sent me on this very long research project to really learn about portrait studios in American prisons. Here are 2 of the photos in the book. And you might now be familiar with these photos because more artists since more recently have made work about these photos, and people have written about these photographs. But at the time when I started making this book, there was no the only place where these images where you could find them was if you visited a prison, or if you worked in a prison, or if you were incarcerated. And so at the time I started writing to prisoners through these pen pal websites that anybody can write to incarcerated individuals that are online. They're kind of like classified ads where people, tell a little bit about themselves and then share their address to get a pen pal. And I started collecting these images, not really knowing what I wanted to do with them. And this project, Prison Landscapes, started similarly to our more lighthearted Art Beyond project, in that it started with a letter where I wrote a letter, sharing the photograph of myself and asking people to share their images and ultimately to represent themselves. And so in prisons, in America, most prisons, state and federal, make these portrait studios available for people to pose in front of. And so this project is about many things, one of which is about the opacity of the prison system. It's very challenging to photograph inside prisons. They're often constructed in these far out places in rural areas, far from cities, and they're literally hard to find. Michael accompanied me on a prison tour probably 10 years ago. I don't know how many years ago, where I photographed in 8 prisons, and every one was just like so hard to find. And the architecture really resembled public high schools, which was interesting. We were like, is that a prison or a public high school?
We pulled into at least one high school.
But the difference, of course, is that prisons have higher fences and barbed wire at the top and more fences and gates. So the paintings are usually painted by prisoners who are sort of anonymously voted on who will paint the backdrop. And the photographs are also taken by prisoners. So when you visit someone, you can pay $2 or $4 for a ticket that gets you a photograph in a prison. And here you can see, people have fun with these photos. You can see someone posing with a fish for his son, and Lynette Newson on the side posing with her. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, it was just somebody.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. So and the portraits are often, the paintings are often these idealized places that represent freedom. And so the sitters are sort of like pretending, to be someplace else. But here, I chose these 2 images today. I think they're interesting because it's like they're posing in front of this, in these gritty urban scenes. And so like the paintings are often represent like the home, right? So let's say you were in a prison in like Portland, in Oregon, the painting would probably be of like the Columbia River Gorge or like the Multnomah waterfalls or something like that. And so this project also, I think is important because it shows prisoners not through this like common lens of criminality, where when you look at prisoners, photographs of prisoners, usually the information of their crime is usually attached to their photograph. But here, I left all mentions of what the crimes are out. And so for here, you really see like prisoners through the eyes of their loved ones. And so it's about seeing the humanity of prisoners. And of course, as I corresponded and had conversations and interviewed prisoners for these years working on the book, it really became very apparent that although these backdrops seem like a kind gesture, to give prisoners these beautiful backdrops to pose in front of, or these interesting backdrops, or they're actually rather cruel, because they hide the reality of prison. And of course, many incarcerated people actually want the outside world to see what prison is like and to see the reality of their lived experience. And they would rather have photographs taken, out on the yard or in their cell or in the cafeteria or in all these other places that are it's not prohibited, right? And so this is a picture that Michael helped me take. I think he carried the lights. And this is in Houtzdale prison in state prison in Pennsylvania. And when I went to photograph in the prisons, it was like very controlled. It's super interesting photographing inside prisons. You have to give them like a checklist of everything you're bringing. Like I have 2 batteries and I have 3 sheets of Polaroid and I have, 2 cameras and 1 camera bag and all these sort of details. So I only had permission to photograph these paintings. And then this picture I thought was very interesting because you could see sort of like the rest of the visiting room reflected in the security mirror and, the picnic tables outside in the yard. And so, it's important to note that the purpose of these backdrops, like the reason why or one of the reasons why prison wardens do not want prisoners photographed in other places of the prison, because they think that the photographs are a security risk, right? So these backdrops that represent freedom are actually used as a tool to keep people incarcerated. They're used as a tool because of this, logistical plan to keep prisoners from physically escaping, right? Because the prison administrations think that if there were pictures of windows and doors and exits circulating and gates circulating, that like prisoners could plan a physical escape. So that is prison landscapes in a very short time. I could talk like hours about this project, but I want to show you guys some other projects that I think are more related to our Art Beyond installation. So this is a 3-day event performance that I did at Crystal Geyser in Utah as part of High Desert Test Sites, which is a really similar outdoor land art project similar to Art Beyond. And this is a project that I also was toying with proposing to Scott for Art Beyond. So Scott, if there are future iterations of Art Beyond, you may see a proposal similar to this in the future. So this project is called Geyser Girls, and I created a waiting room, which also was a reading room. And the waiting room was at Crystal Geyser, which is a very like unpredictable cold water carbon dioxide geyser. It unpredictably spurts water. What would you say? Explodes. It unpredictably explodes. And so, this project has sort of like the childlike wonder that I'm interested in, that you'll see in some of my other work, which is just like the curiosity and the wonder of waiting for a geyser to explode. And so this is the waiting room. We got this sofa from a thrift store that by chance, very lucky, matched the travertine rocks that surrounded the geyser. And so I set up this makeshift waiting room. And because it was High Desert Test Sites, there were lots of people who were coming for this like art fair weekend. And so I had a pretty big audience of people coming and going, and they would come and they would sit with me in the waiting room. And here in the background, you can see the geyser. I posted this gymnast poster. And so I picked these gymnast magazines simply because I was sort of making this connection between like the upward movement of the water and the upward movement of gymnasts who can fling their body up in the air. And so, I got to meet a lot of people in the waiting room, have conversations about the geyser. We got to discuss the gymnast magazines, which were this sort of vintage artifact. I'm going a little too fast. So after 3 days, there was no, how would you say, geologic? Yeah, there was no geologic activity. It was just us meeting people. I was honestly very disappointed. And I was sort of accepting the fact that, we waited for something that never happened. But on the last night at 4:45 a.m., Michael and I, sleeping in our tent, and other campers who camped along with us, were woken up to this like incredible, would you call it like eruption. A slurping sound? It was like a glurping, slurping sound. And of course, I wasn't like prepared for this to happen in the middle of the night. And my goal is really to photograph this geyser doing its thing. But yeah, so I wasn't prepared. So Michael again helped me like with the flash, because I'm not the best with flash photography. And so here you can see the geyser erupting. And it really was just like this amazing like moment to witness. And I don't know if it was amazing just because it was amazing in its own, right? Or because it was in the middle of the night and we ended up like, oh, I think we lit this not with a flash. No, we didn't have a flash.
No, that was the on-camera flash.
We partially lit it with our headlamps because we were not prepared for like a night photography situation. But everyone who was sleeping just like got out of their tents and I wish I had more photos. They were like in their sleeping bags on the sofa, and this thing just like kept going and going and going for like 4 or 5 hours. And so
Alyse didn't stop watching it.
and I didn't stop
She
photographing.
didn't stop watching.
This is one photograph of like hundreds of images that it was just like this incredible experience. And I think it was incredible because we had waited, right? And there's something about like the waiting and the anticipation, and then this thing finally happening. And this is me in the waiting room. I included it because, can you guys see the GIF? It's a GIF, so you can actually see the way that the water moved over the surface of the travertine, which created this kind of light show. It's kind of psychedelic effect. And so for the entire 3 days, there's just like this slow drip of water on the travertine, like below the sofa. And so it's like your butt is dry on the sofa, but your feet were kind of like wet on the travertine. So that is Geyser Girls. And I would like to recreate waiting rooms in other natural places. And I think it would be perfect for Art Beyond and at a future date, but it didn't happen in 2021. So I wanted to show you guys a few older projects and newer projects, a few projects specifically that I worked with children, because I think that there's like this big cliche of an artist or a photographer has a child and then all of a sudden they start making work about children. But I've actually been interested in the subject of childhood for a very long time. Oh gosh, and I realized I can't read this, but this is a project that I did called Lifetime Goals, where I collected children's lifetime goals from a 4th grade class and I think maybe a 2nd grade class, and I just wanted to read 1 or 2 of these. My lifetime goals: to be a famous artist, to pass the 4th grade or college, to be better at school, to have 1 million friends, to be rich, to not have glasses, have contacts, and last but not least, to work with babies. And this one: work at a casino, be young parents, be a great gambler, be successful. So I really love the way these lifetime goals sort of like reflect the culture and the parenting and this sort of just like social environment that these children are being formed within. And then this is another early work that I did called When We Were Young. And I asked people to submit photographs of themselves as babies, and then I printed them on their t-shirt. And so the idea was really about empathy, which I think a lot of my work is about, having these shared experiences and having empathy. And so when we were young, the concept, it's funny looking back on this, but I think it is related to the Art Beyond project. The concept is that, like, if you're in an argument with someone or you don't like someone or someone's like your enemy, if you could see a photograph of them as a baby, you would then like be more receptive to listening to them and being empathetic. And so that was that. And then,
this is my dad's blind Sophie. You know what his name was? What? John? Mm-hmm. Because, yes. My dad's also named John Gilchrist. Even I. John Gilchrist. Sorry for Jay. And he died, and I don't have him anymore. But I'm okay. I take good care of my mom. I help her with stuff. Look, and this is my trophy. When I put it to my dad's bed, I want to say it's my trophy anyway. You know, I gotta keep it. And then I keep going. I'm older, and I get more trophies. Yeah, you can remember that. You can remember that as your dad. Can we bring all your trophies? What? I didn't want a trophy. That's okay. Your dad didn't. Well, my brother did. My brother went. This is my baby. She's called. This is my dad's blind trophy.
Okay, sorry for playing that before describing it, it kind of went really quickly. So that is Show and Tell, and that's a series of documentaries I made about the American educational system, time-honored tradition of sharing objects. And that is another project that I did a long time ago about the sort of relationship between children and objects and what those objects tell us about the children upbringing. And I think that it's an important project because it really is similar to, I think, what we do as artists, which, what is that we share, which is special to us. I realize I'm a little low on time, and so I'm going to kind of quickly go through this last project that I did, which is a painting installation called Skunks and Flowers. Skunks are sort of the centerpiece of this installation. I'm interested in them as these sort of nocturnal creatures that are very unlike other small mammals because they don't have the same fear of being prey, and so they don't have the same nervousness that other small animals have, because they can sort of protect themselves with their scent glands. And so this is the installation, and here you see I sort of contrasted the sulfuric smell of the scent with these Vera-esque inspired floral vintage patterns. And the installation includes paintings of self-help books. This is like another series that I did. Paintings of reproductive drawings that were inspired from a photograph that I found of a sex education clinic. And so this is the installation. And then the last slide that I wanted to show you was this event that I did called Stinky Drinks and Edible Flowers, where I worked with these 3 children to create these skunk costumes. And we wrote a song together about skunks, and they sort of performed in my installation. Do you think I should play a minute of it? Okay. I'll play like 30 seconds of it. Do you know how to stop it? I'm a little sicker. My life's a total wreck. My sense of it may linger, but oh, hey, what's the heck? Okay, so thank you. I'm going to let Michael talk about his work now.
It's so fun to hear. I love hearing Alyse talk about her work. Okay, so I'm going to kind of fly through this. So my work kind of in recent years has been about kind of 2 large things, kind of looking at systems of power and also things that work kind of imagining labor utopically. So this is a photo of the unfinished obelisk, which was an obelisk in ancient Egypt that was going to be the biggest, tallest, grandest monument to absolute power. And just before it was kind of finished being hewn from the bedrock, it cracked under its own internal power structures. And I started imagining its connection to Los Angeles' City Hall, which is also an obeliskine form. And I started thinking about how kind of powerless I felt while watching things in the world. So this is in 2013, in the Arab Spring, kind of have all this freedom and then this kind of collapse, and feeling kind of muted by this thing. And so I wanted to, so I had this idea to basically create a 2-scale replica of this recumbent symbol of failed absolute power on state-owned land. So I approached the California state parks, which own this chunk of land along the edge of the LA River, which at the time was experiencing a lot of gentrification and was a site of a kind of massive political power struggle within Los Angeles. And the state park was kind of ended up as part of that conversation. So this is an old railroad yard that was destined to become a park that was basically laying without too much use. And so after talking about this idea, I got permission. It was a crazy bureaucratic, incredible bureaucratic thing that happened, but I got permission, and right after I got permission, we rented a walk behind saw, and I invited all my friends and artists to basically kind of joyfully take turns for about 30 or 40 minutes to operate these tools. So this is Colette Brown operating the walk behind saw. This is Sarah Bay-Gachot operating the excavator. And so as we kind of built this, I'm really interested in how we demystify the contemporary built environment, and also paying homage and thinking about all the nameless laborers who for thousands of years have built our world, and all the kind of inventiveness, thinking about like who was the toddler who became an adult, who came up with the idea of an obelisk in the first place. And so this is the form as it was just before it was finished. So you can see the LA River, you can see the currents of electricity, you can see the freeway in the background, you can see the train. You can't see the underground oil pipeline that's like 40 feet to the right on this image. But just thinking about all this power, all these currents of energy. The title of this sculpture is The Unfinished. Yeah. And so I'm really interested in how symbols become what they become. How do we create moments that represent time, that represent ideas? And I invited other artists. So this is Rafa Esparza, who ended up building thousands of Adobe bricks and placed them on the surface of it, and then did a performance. I'm really proud of the fact that this was like his first big project with Adobe bricks that he's now gone on to show and do installations all over the country in institutions. So another project that kind of goes along with this practice of things that work and kind of imagining labor utopically is this project called the Steam Egg. And so this is a 11-foot tall, 7-foot diameter sculpture that is also a steam room. You enter it through a hole in the bottom, and inside it, so you can see a person getting out of it here. This is a performance that was happening. So every Tuesday night for a few years, Alyse and I at our studio basically hosted these steams, where it would basically bring people together. And every week we invited somebody to be the herb J and to be the steam J. So the herb J is somebody who basically curated the smell. So think, pleasant things like ginger, but also think of more kind of gnarly things like steaming and horseradish or seaweed. And then the music was kind of a more classic like DJ thing, but we always kind of push people towards more experimental sound and experimental music. And so for like a steam that happened on the day after MLK Day, Ralston Wu kind of curated political speeches. And so what it is you enter through this hole in the bottom. You have to kind of battle through sweaty drippingness and all these feet and knees. And then you enter this thing. And it is actually the world's first bottom entry sauna. So I'm going to play just a super quick, I'm going to skip this video. I don't think we have time.
In the egg, you're forced to be very intimate with people.
Okay, and so I then made a second steam egg, and so this one could travel, and so it ended up traveling at a number of institutions where folks at those places were ending up becoming the kind of curators and the steam J's and the herb J's and kind of activating the communities and bringing people together. So it was this kind of communal bringing together. You could imagine this being a really a project during COVID. So at one installation, I really wanted to make this project called Endless Column, which was part river, part aqueduct, part suspension bridge, and part oil derrick. And it was made of these ceramic personal pools and these ceramic gutters that were made from studio trash. And basically water would pump from the bottom tub up through the top. So the kind of clear pipe is it pumping up, and then it would kind of flow down. And as a means to kind of explore this extractive history of the West, stolen lands, water rights, oil, gas, etc. So these personal pools that you can kind of see maybe in this image the best is I wanted to explore that kind of within this kind of collectivist project and of the steam egg, which is so like happy in these ways. I also wanted to kind of really explore the side of American individualism. And really in contrast to that collectivism with these personal pools. And so this is just a detail of the glaze. And there's been iterations of this. So this is a version of this sculpture a different sculpture at an outdoor space. And just this image gives you a sense of scale. And so these are all ceramic. Another quick project I want to show is this project called Juice Work, where I made these handheld tools as a way to kind of extract the history again of California real estate boosterism, and also this idea of the economy shift from the manufacturing labor to the service labor. So this was like an incredibly labor intensive project, but the goal was to just have people make their own perfect cup of juice.
And something that you can't see in the pictures, which was that citrus really was the main element, and like the smell of the citrus in this very large room, it filled the room, and it was a big part of it.
Yeah. And so as this kind of video is playing, just to kind of, so I made these tools, and I made these cups, and so I knew that the tool was the first thing, and that was like where the idea came from. And then I at this point I had not experimented with clay in 20 years, and I was not experienced with ceramics really before this project, other than like a high school, 3-week project or something. But I realized I needed lights to create these kind of intimate pockets of space. I needed these tables, and so the melon lights are these basically it's like a mold of a melon, and then I cast it with my hand and press molding it. So again, there's like these arches and all these kind of structures that made this thing, and I had to make sinks to wash in. So people would dip their tool and then dip it in the next one, dip it in the highest one, and to kind of rinse it, and then we would drain it out the gallery door and then refill it again. And so it was this kind of absurdist, but like one part that I think is really interesting that ties into the current LA or into this project Art Beyond is this idea of how do people learn, and so this intuitiveness. And so this is the final thing we're going to show. So this is at the Getty. So the juicers became these juicerinas, which are microtonal instruments, wind instruments. And I'm going to play this as I kind of talk. So at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, which kind of houses, the art of the West, right? We basically took over the space, and each artist and there were 100 artists who collaborated with me on this as the players. Each of us took over one gallery space and basically created an improvisational score with one of the kind of masterworks of the piece. And then after about 15 minutes of us having a solo to these artworks, everybody rejoined, and we kind of met in this kind of central part of the space, and had this kind of what really turned into like a much bigger and more wonderful experience, I think, than any of us kind of anticipated. And it's also like it's weirdly muted. Like that night was the night of just like a horrible mass shooting, and so the kind of within hours after this finished, everybody was kind of crying. And so thinking about kind of how the world is in the kind of making of our art, but then also in how it might become, like where it might go. And so maybe that was, I think we kind of flew through a lot. So I think that's where we're at.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Alyse. For those of you at home, if you have any questions, you can type those into the chat and I will read them aloud. Or you are also invited to unmute yourself and share your video and ask Alyse and Michael directly. And Michael, Alyse, if you don't mind, will you stop sharing your screen? There we go. Okay. Anybody at home with any questions? And Alyse, duly noted. Next Art Beyond, look forward to your proposals. Great works. And this Art Beyond has gone so well that we are excited to attempt to turn it into a biennial event. So we will be looking for spring and summer of 2023. And once we recover from this one, we'll come up with ways to grow and improve and various levels of projects. Yeah.
It's great. And it was really great to see, to kind of participate in some of the other artist projects for Art Beyond, as well as the kind of with my sculpture program hat on as well. So.
Yeah, and if there's no questions coming in, that's a good lead to a question, Michael. I see Chella. Chella, did you have a question?
Hi, I have a question. So after seeing like both of those artist talks, both of you talking about your work, it's clear that you're really different artists, and you kind of touched briefly on like the intersection of your practices, like collaborating for this project. Can you talk a little more about like collaboration in the past from people with two like such different practices, and just like kind of the, I don't know, I guess like the thesis statement of you guys collaborating?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like it's interesting. We have a lot of similarities, but we have very different aesthetics, and our brains just work totally differently. And so it's just like hard for our brains to like get on the same wavelength. And I like that challenge. I think we have collaborated a few times on like public art projects. We made this really awesome, actually a waiting room for a police, for the LAPD waiting room for children who were abused, who were waiting in this waiting room to get their scars photographed. So I think we did a great job collaborating on that.
Yeah, so that was with another artist, Rostin Wu. The three of us collaborated, and that was a pretty intense to try to figure out the like how to create a space that
how to create a space that was comfortable for children, so that when it was time to take off their clothes, which is obviously a very uncomfortable thing for anybody, that maybe our art would like ease their discomfort a little bit. But I think like for me, the challenge with creating like 50-50 collaboration is often like, if you're just working with two people, the project often doesn't feel totally like mine or totally like the other person's. So for like Art Beyond, it kind of ended up feeling more like Michael's project, and a big part of that is because he was like making the sculptures, you know. So even though I was like part of the whole like conceptual process, he's like the maker in the group, you know.
Yeah, which was like which at times was really hard for both of us, because I would be so in it, because also because of COVID, Alyse couldn't come into the studio and make it, and because we have a toddler at home, and like we weren't making the things together. And so, but one observation when we were putting the slideshow together was I wanted to fill the red wooden oak log with every piece of ceramic thing that I made for the thing. So there's another like 10 daffodil flower things. There's like 4 more trains. There's another dozen stars. There's maybe another 8 pieces of cedar that didn't make it into it. And we had this kind of like argument for a day about like, should we add them all and just make it full? And then we were looking at images, and Alyse really didn't want it full. She kept saying, take it away, minimize. But then we were looking at her installation of skunks and flowers, and how just like it's wall to wall image. And we kind of realized that sometimes we do have these.
I really like to collaborate in this way where like there's a framework that someone comes up with, and then different people are given like different jobs to be like, okay, you're the photographer, like more in terms of like a directorial, like film kind of way. I think that really works well for me, but it's so complicated. So much of my work is in some way collaborative with people, but it's not like, you know, it's collaborative, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was like a collaboration.
I think Tom Finkelpearl wrote a book called What We Made maybe 5 years ago, where he really like breaks down kind of levels of collaboration and cooperation and all these kinds of different ways that artists can work together, and that non-artists can work with artists to still be kind of on these kind of footings. So
thank you, Michael. Thanks, Alyse, and thanks for your question, Chella. Anybody else at home with a question? Michael, I was going to lead into, as you quickly mentioned, being an educator, running the sculpture program here at SOU. One of our creative arts students did make it through a jury process to show at ScienceWorks. And I saw the images of the moving of those sculptures to ScienceWorks. Can can you talk a little bit about, being an educator and working with a student who is able to kind of, show within this framework and the teaching moments in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think that our practices, because Alyse and I both work with people, I think that me working with students as a college professor is really just an extension. There are moments that teaching is just teaching and it's not a collaborative process, right? But I like to say this idea that like in a classroom, you have 20 students and on day one and one teacher, and by week 2, I'm hoping for 21 students and 21 teachers, right? And that's a goal. And so so the artist you're mentioning is Jessie Eaton-Shields, who was running. She's also a mom of young children, and she's has come back to college a little later in life. And she was running, and she saw these metal poles in the ditch, and she basically collected them and counted them and realized that they were part of what had been an abandoned geodesic dome of some sort, and wanted to make a sculpture with it. And she was really just making it in my class. And then when the Art Beyond public call happened, once you got more people, more organizations on board and space opened up, and you had this really great open call. And so it was really fun to kind of see Jessie kind of processing it, because I think at first she actually submitted a stone, like a kind of a more traditional stone carving thing that she had made 6 months earlier or something before she was in college. And I really encouraged her to, through conversation. I wouldn't say I encouraged, but I would say that, it was a collaborative, to a certain cooperative, like, hey, let's have this conversation about it. And like, maybe you should submit that idea too. And then it was really great. And I was not a part of the selection committee, so I was really excited to see how that got chosen, and then how it also became this moment. By the time it was moved, almost all of the students were vaccinated. And so it was all of a sudden, at that moment, it was right as, and I was teaching in person. I was one of the few people teaching in person at SOU. Really, by having this big space and air and all this stuff, it made it possible. But to see all of a sudden 10 students help Jessie lift this, because we didn't cut it apart and then move it and put it back together. It was just lifted up over the 6-foot fence and carried across this thing and put it into a truck. It was like this insane collaborative process that is what I think makes art making so much fun. And like the Avantika Bawa yellow scaffolding piece, also like half of those were painted in our sculpture area by a number of our students, and seeing kind of those students kind of come together and finish that and put it together and participate and dress in yellow for the musical performance. It was just like so fun and so rewarding to see how art and sculpture particularly can kind of be this way to activate folks.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions from anybody at home? I'm happy to read them out of the chat if you'd like. If there are no other questions, Michael and Alyse, I just want to say congrats on surviving all of this that's been going on for you both. The transition, if you list the top things stressful in life, career change, moving, buying a home, having a child, you both have done that in the past couple of years here, and have not even yet had time to fully assimilate into beautiful Southern Oregon and Ashland when the pandemic hit. So I just want to say, as a colleague, I look forward to seeing you both more so as things improve, and seeing the artwork be made and created, and what's to come in the future. And thank you so much for your time today and participating in this creative industries discussion.
Thank you,
Thank
Scott.
you, Scott. That means a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for showing up on this sunny day after a whole lot of Zoom for a year.
Have a great summer.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.